In 2022, 69% of the people who died by suicide were white males.
Mm-hmm.
Please explain why white male suicides are skyrocketing and no one is talking about it.
Great question. I learned while studying psychology in graduate school that white men have consistently had the highest rate of suicide in this country. Middle-aged, rich white men lead the country in suicide. Elderly black women are the lowest risk for suicide. I would argue because of their spiritual foundation. Black people are a spiritual people. Black women are the epitome of spirituality because she's the first human being that God created to send life through. So I believe it is our spirituality, despite slavery, despite Reconstruction, despite Willie Lynch, despite Jim Crow, despite civil rights, despite Black power, despite the crack, despite the Obama neglect, despite the Joe Biden hypocrisy, our faith as a people has insulated us from the thought of taking one's life as a result of not being able to cope with one's emotional pain. No disrespect to the European community. They can be religious too, but they do not have the spiritual strength or foundation of the original man and the original woman. I think Europeans are at a significant disadvantage when it comes to establishing a relationship with supreme consciousness because, number one, their culture is not rooted in connection with God. They come from a very objective, a very Eurocentric scientific approach to reality that says if I can't see it, if I can't measure it, if I can't manipulate it, if I can't control it, it must not exist. So if we look at white psychology doesn't even admit the existence of spirit. Sigmund Freud, although the father of European psychology, he came the closest to establishing the belief that there is a spirit that dwells within the man, but he was rejected when the behavioral revolution came, and they said that he was basically a heretic for dealing in concepts that had no scientific basis. So white psychology doesn't admit the existence of spirit. So here's the question. If a white man is suicidal and white psychology doesn't admit the existence of spirit, when he goes for treatment to deal with his suicide, and if there is in fact a soul within us, how is he ever going to overcome the emotional pain that he's suffering from if the therapist working with him won't even admit that there's something greater that is motivating his life from within him? With Black people, when we go to therapy, we tell the therapist we have a spirit. It ain't a question to be debated. We have a spirit. So therapy is about reconnecting you to that essence. White psychology don't even admit it exists. So if you're a white person suffering trauma and you haven't grew up in a home or a community with a strong religious or spiritual basis, what intervention can be had for that type of person to stop them from committing the ultimate mistake? I believe it is the materialistic nature of European society, the anti-spiritual nature of European society, the narcissistic nature of European society that measures success by material growth, that has all these white men and girls judging their life success based on what they earn and what they own. That is a recipe for death and destruction. And we also see a similar parallel with Chinese college-age students who, if they don't get accepted into Harvard, into Yale, into Princeton, into some of these elite universities, they take their life because they feel that they failed the family, because after all, my mother and father sacrificed their entire life to put me in this position, and I didn't score high enough on the tests. So whether we're dealing with, now the Asians do have a pretty strong spiritual foundation, but in the modern world, in their pursuit to conquer the European, I think they have become just as materialistic as the European, and as a result, their mental health has declined just as much. So even if you look recently, a couple of these recent mass shootings have been Asians, you understand? And to that point, the white man and the yellow man are forming a coalition, at least on this soil, to combat the black man. 89% of the interracial marriages that have taken place in the past decade have been white to Asian. The Asians are the group that the white power structure has adopted as probationary whites to increase their numbers and push back against black people.
I'm glad you spoke about materialism, because my follow-up question to that is that I believe white men struggle because the subsidies their forefathers received, specifically the GI Bill,
Mm-hmm.
and even the increase in homes, and even nepotism to a certain extent, because I think nepotism has declined tremendously in America because everything is short term, everything is moving around so much. You're not going to be at a job for 30 years. I think because of those factors, they're not living up to the standard in their family, and they can't deal with it.
That's a great point. 3 things come to mind with your comment. Number 1, is there an ancestral curse against Europeans in America? You follow? When I look at that type of suicide, when I look at the type of mental illness that I see against European people in general, when I look at the medical issues, don't get me wrong, we have them too, but many of our medical issues are induced by the society in which we live due to poor food and poor medical care. They don't have to worry about that, but yet they're suffering. Look at the decline in their numbers. I mean, white people have been going out of their way as a government to reduce the numbers of black people in this country at least since the 1970s. AIDS, poor nutrition, black on black crime, police genocide. Exactly. But yet, half of the states have a zero white birth growth rate. More white people are dying and being born in 25 states while you're going out of your way to get rid of blacks. I think there might be an ancestral curse due to slavery. But black people can't get comfortable with that. See, I'm very careful when I bring up things of a spiritual nature because as a race of people, we're always looking for an excuse to not do nothing. And that's one of my issues with the black church. The black church gives us some very clever excuses to sit around and not do nothing. We have to be agents of change. We can't sit around waiting for spiritual and cosmological intervention because no people who ever got free because the angels came and fought for them. You see, so black people have to make sure we live in this reality. Although we may be inspired by what goes on the spiritual side of reality, we can make our decisions based on that. We have to make our decisions based on the real world in which we live. And any intervention we're going to get from the ancestors or from God or from the spirits, let it come when it comes. But you can't make your decisions based on that.